Swiss Frankie.
Yeah, full tribe in the building. Full tribe static addict. Melchizedek media. Melchizedek music. Yeah,
www.swissfrankie.com.
stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused, don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused, it's like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused, Hebrews we got next. I preach the Melchizedek. Stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused, don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused, it's like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused, Hebrews we got next. So never abandon your post.
Keep your eyes on the prize. I'm not talking about no dollar sign. The kingdom's at hand, that's the plan, my man. Spiritual gifts is what I store up. Waiting for the sun to show up. Then Babylon gon' burn up, and them gold streets gon' turn up. There'll be love for thy neighbor, will be heavenly favor. Got you love's what you get when you live in the script. So tune in to this vibration. We from his holy nation, here to give words to the ears that hear. Screaming Yahshua's coming till he appears. Cry loud and spare not bruise. Now that script shakes, strong in the faith in this heavenly race. Washed by the blood of Yahweh Shah, that's grace.
Stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused, don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused, it's like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused, Hebrews we got next. I preach the Melchizedek. Stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused, don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused, it's like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused, Hebrews we got next. So never abandon your post.
Rome, 455 AD, at the gates of the Imperial Palace. Geyser, known as the Spear King, chief of a tribe of Germanic warriors, the Vandals. They've crushed Roman armies in North Africa. Now, they're after the riches of Rome itself. The Roman Empire lasted for 5 centuries. At its height, it ruled over 60 million people and 2 million square miles. As it disintegrates, barbarian tribes seize their opportunity. Angles and Saxons push into Britain. Franks sweep across Gaul, giving their name to modern France. Visigoths seize what is now Spain.
When power collapses at any time, anywhere, it creates a vacuum, by definition. Others come running in. Territory gets grabbed up. Ideas are repudiated. The Romans learned it. We don't know who's going to be next.
With the collapse of Rome, Europe reverts to a dark age of war, famine, and savagery. Many essentials of Roman life lost for centuries. The technology to build aqueducts, the use of coins, in some areas, even writing. Rome loses 95% of its population. London is abandoned.
The drama of Rome suggests that civilization does not progress in a straight line towards more prosperity, more order, more law, more technology. It shows us the picture of amazing things being achieved by the Greeks and the Romans, and then those things being lost again.
With the fall of Rome, Europe will fragment and stay divided for 1,500 years.
Shalom, family. It's your little brother Benign coming at you again with another video. In the last video, I said I wanted to start a series of videos that will lead up to the revealing of who I believe to be the 10 horns, the beast, and the whore who rides the beast. I also stated that this was my own personal study, and you don't have to agree with me. I just wanted to present the information that I have attained through my studies that brought me to this conclusion. I think the only way people can share an opinion on any subject with another is contingent on the amount of information held by both parties. If both parties came across the same information, then chances are that they would have a similar belief or opinion. But if one party has more information than the other, or if he has less information than the other, then the chances of having different opinions increases. These series of videos are me presenting the information that I have come across that has led me to this belief. Others may have more information than I, or maybe they have less, and because of that, their beliefs may differ, and that's okay. If anyone has more information, feel free to leave it in the comment section. In the last video, we showed what we call today Western Europe's kingdoms that stood at the final fall of Rome in 476 AD. That Western Rome was now controlled by multiple barbarian kingdoms, some converting to Christianity, while others held on to their pagan/German/Nordic traditions, while Eastern Rome maintained the traditional Roman ways of the days of Constantine the Great. Continuing the progression of recorded history, that would bring us to the Dark Ages from here. Remember in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel told the king that the kingdoms that shall rise after him shall be inferior to the one that precedes them? History proves that the Persians were inferior to the Babylonians. The Greeks were inferior to the Persians. The Romans were inferior to the Greeks. Continuing in that pattern, the barbarians were most certainly inferior to the Romans. That's why there isn't much history to read about the barbarians prior to them crossing the Rhine River, other than the information that you receive from the Romans themselves. Although the barbarians were fierce fighters, they were far from being the brightest crayons in the box. They didn't possess any old writings of their people. They had no historians who should record the words and actions of their philosophers and heroes. Therefore, they were referred to as barbarians by the Romans, who had all of those things. Philosophers and historians were two of the biggest pillars in what we call Western civilization. Yet Rome was conquered by a bunch of people who basically couldn't read or write. The barbarians will mix with the civilized Roman citizens and produce the people we know today as Europeans. The clay just didn't mix with the iron, but they also ruled over them and made all the laws of the land after the fall of Western Rome. So when you have a group of people who are dumber than an ox ruling, then you can expect the intellectual level of all the land will decrease, plummeting you into a dark age. According to the Britannica Encyclopedia, the Dark Ages or Early Middle Ages are the early medieval period of Western European history, specifically the time 476 to 800 CE, when there was no Roman or Holy Roman emperor in the West, or, more generally, the period between 500 and 1000, which was marked by frequent warfare and virtual disappearance of urban life. The name of the period refers to the movement of so-called barbarian peoples, including the Huns, Goths, Vandals, Bulgars, Alani, Suebi, and Franks, into what had been the Western Roman Empire. The term Dark Ages is now rarely used by historians because of the value judgment it implies. Though sometimes taken to derive its meaning from the dearth of information about the period, the term's more usual and pejorative sense is of a period of intellectual darkness and barbarity. Now I know that some Israelites teach that they were called the Dark Ages because that's when black people ruled Europe. Well, the truth is that Rome fell in 476 AD, and the Moors or the Umayyad Caliphate didn't come into Spain until 711 AD. So the Dark Ages had already a century and a half, about 135 years, into it before the Moors even crossed into Spain. So although black people did rule parts of Spain during the time of the Dark Ages, that's not why it's called the Dark Ages. It's called the Dark Ages because the progression in intellectual culture and reading and writing and technology decreased, not because the world was ruled by black people. But if people have other information to show that black people ruled outside of Spain throughout since the fall of Western Rome all the way until the 1800s, please feel free to leave that information in the comment section. Now, the Dark Ages was called what it is because of the lack of progression in technology. Like I said, there was a lack of progression in technology, literature, information, education, and a decline in social construct or laws to govern the people. The Britannica says the sack of Rome by Alaric the Visigoth in 410 CE had enormous impact on the political structure and social climate of the Western world. For the Roman Empire had provided the basis of social cohesion for most of Europe. Although the Germanic tribes that forcibly migrated into southern and western Europe in the 5th century were ultimately converted to Christianity, they retained many of their customs and ways of life. The changes in forms of social organization they introduced rendered centralized government and cultural unity impossible. Many of the improvements in the quality of life introduced during the Roman Empire, such as a relatively efficient agriculture, extensive road networks, water supply systems, and shipping routes, decayed substantially, as did artistic and scholarly endeavors. This decline persisted throughout the migration period, a historical period sometimes called the Dark Ages, Late Antiquity, or the Middle Ages. The migration period lasted from the fall of Rome to about the year 1000, with a brief hiatus during the flowering of the Carolingian court established by Charlemagne. Apart from that interlude, no large political structure arose in Europe to provide stability. Two great kingdoms, Germany and Italy, began to lose their political unity almost as soon as they had acquired it. They had to wait until the 19th century before they found it again. The only force capable of providing a basis for social unity was the Roman Catholic Church. The Middle Ages, therefore, present the confusing and often contradictory picture of a society attempting to structure itself politically on a spiritual basis. This attempt came to a definitive end with the rise of the artistic, commercial, and other activities anchored firmly in the secular world in the period just preceding the Renaissance. So all of that came to the end during the Carolingian dynasty, where Charlemagne ensured that the regular people should learn how to read and write, and therefore literature, arts, poems, painting became common amongst the regular people, and that is what brought them out of the Dark Ages. Now, after the fall of Rome in the 5th century, Western Europe fell into anarchy and chaos. There were no longer Roman soldiers protecting the roads and ensuring the delivery of all trades. Merchants were now being looted by barbarian clans, some being killed and others taken as slaves. Roads became fearful to travel. All roads that once led to Rome are now more likely to lead you to your death. Towns and cities became isolated when trading stopped. People were now forced to live on whatever they can produce in the region that they dwelt in. No more Roman soldiers meant no more laws and no more protection from would-be lawbreakers. Cities were on their own to govern and protect themselves. This began the rise of feudalism. It's hard for me to pronounce that word. Feudalism. And this is where a person would take control over a certain area, consider it like a neighborhood in the city that you live in, and there will be a lord over that neighborhood who would guarantee protection of all the people in the neighborhood from people outside of the neighborhood. So there was no longer what you might call a national laws or a national soldiers governing the land. It all became local, right? And many of these cities would be raided and plundered. Cities that once were the epitome of civilization would now lay in ruins, ungoverned and unkept. Isolation begot culture decline and reinforced language barriers. Some cities would go months or years between visitations of a stranger or a merchant. The people would become illiterate and unable to write until Charlemagne and the Carolingian dynasty. Music, art, poems, and such things would cease. Western history would barely be recorded for about 300 years.
The term Dark Ages refers to a period of approximately 6 centuries that is largely lost to recorded history. Following the fall of Rome in 476 CE, the entire dynamic of Europe underwent a complete shift in power structure and culture. There is much dissension in terms of the window of time in which this period may have actually occurred. For this presentation, the Dark Ages is thought to have covered the era between the 4th century, when Rome fell, to the beginning of the 11th century, when the landscape of the primary countries of modern-day Europe began to take shape. In terms of the Dark Ages, most historians agree that the label is a misnomer. The term Dark Ages was coined by an Italian scholar named Francesco Petrarca, better known today as simply Petrarch. He believed the literature and innovation of this period were stunted when compared to the Roman Empire, perceiving the era to be void of the culture and progressiveness that existed in Western Europe before the Roman Empire lost control of the continent. Historians today now refer to the Dark Ages as the early Middle Ages, which is truly a more accurate description. The fall of Rome and the world after. For about 100 years before the fall of Rome, the city was in steep decline. Infighting, petty ambitions, and greed were commonplace within its leadership. This poor leadership and inefficient governing would lead to the inevitable loss of control of the conquered territories within the empire. Rome's inability to provide for the people on the outskirts of their borders would serve as the impetus for the attacks signaling the beginning of the end of ancient Rome. Skirmishes, like the Battle of Hadrianopolis in 378 CE and the invasion of the Visigoths in 410 CE, indicated Rome's loosening grip of power and triggered other Germanic tribes to challenge Rome for their own previously conquered territories. In 476 CE, a weakened Rome fell to the Germanic warlord Odoacer. Odoacer killed the father of the child emperor Romulus Augustulus, took control of the rest of his military, and offered the young emperor the option of retirement. The emperor wisely accepted and fled into exile for the rest of his life. This series of events was the end of the Western Roman Empire. The fall of Rome sent shockwaves across the continent. Western Europe splintered, and regions that had considered themselves under Roman rule began taking control of their own much smaller domains. The ensuing reconfiguration of the fallen empire naturally triggered many wars, as different tribes began to reclaim lost ancestral territories. Strong men from all corners attempted to take advantage of the power vacuum the defeat of Rome had created. The rise of the Christian Church. The Roman Empire practiced its own religious belief system, which we observe as Roman mythology. Still, the empire would typically allow conquered regions to continue with their own beliefs. The only exception was when something, or someone, directly challenged Roman authority. This more laissez-faire approach to managing their conquered territories created an ideal climate for the rise of Christianity as a religion. As Christianity grew across the regions, more and more of the Germanic tribes began to follow the teachings of Christ. By 313 CE, Emperor Constantine I issued the Edict of Milan, a proclamation granting legal status to a number of religions within the Roman Empire, including Christianity. In 325 CE, the emperor introduced the Council of Nicaea, whose core purpose was to establish the primary beliefs of Christianity. The council created the Nicene Creed, which cements the basic precepts and beliefs of Christianity in concise form. These events, and the resultant recognition, legitimized Christianity to the empire and the entire continent. By 476 CE, Christianity had become a clearly recognizable and powerful religion. So when Rome fell to the Germanic tribes, who were Christian, people saw the empire's defeat as a sign that the Roman gods were not as powerful as the Christian God. With so many onlookers in Europe perceiving the fall of Rome as a religious sign, Christianity saw a vast and meteoric rise on the continent.
To make it simple, the Dark Ages is the time period between the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, which was the Carolingian Empire. That might be hard to follow. So Rome fell in 476, and 400 years later, the Carolingian Empire renamed their empire the Holy Roman Empire when Charlemagne was crowned by the Pope on December 25th, year 800. This is the coronation of Charlemagne, when the Carolingian Empire would now be called the Holy Roman Empire. And Eastern Rome had a problem with it, because Eastern Rome felt as if that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy, because it was Christianity, or first century Christianity, I should say, mixed with paganism. So now it was no longer holy. And then they said, nor was it Roman, because the people were no longer Roman, or at least pure Roman, because now the people were the barbarian kingdoms mixed with the Romans. So they were a whole different people. The people in Eastern Rome still claimed to be Romans, but the new people, who were the tall, white-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people described by Julius Caesar and Tacitus in the last video, well, those people now mix with, I believe to be the white-skinned, black-haired people, right? And the Eastern people was like, those people are no longer Roman. So they said no longer that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy, right, because it was pagan, nor was it Roman, because it was barbarians, nor was it an empire, because it was a small area that it covered. So for those 325 years of darkness between the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, the barbarian kingdoms, who are now converted to Christianity, will be broken down into many different theologies and understandings, including Adamites, Arianism, and Monotheism. The Catholic Church that you know of today would not begin to come into its existence until around 800 AD at the crowning of Charlemagne. It is in the Dark Ages when the iron, which is Rome, began to mix with the MIRY clay as prophesied in Daniel 2, the MIRY clay being the Barbarian Tribes. These two will produce the Europeans that we know today, the ones who have given the entire world a half Roman and half Germanic culture that we now call Western civilization. And in the next and upcoming video, I'm going to show more of how that MIRY clay has mixed with the iron, or the barbarian culture mixed with the Roman culture. And that's the world that you live in today. Remember in the first video when I said that if you make a statue of gold of someone, you are really saying something. Well, there is a reason why Charlemagne is called the father of Europe. If it is the Most High's will, we will dig a little further into Charlemagne the Great and his role as we continue to prove that the Western European nations of today are the 10 toes made up of both iron and clay. Until then, family, stay safe, stay prayed up, and if you don't do anything else, stay focused.
Stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh. Stay focused. Hebrew, we got next. I preach the McKells and Dags. Stay focused. Yeah, how what we choose, we worship in spirit and truth. Stay focused. Don't be a fool. Study to show thyself approved. Stay focused. It's for like blood in my chest. The word manifested in flesh.